Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lucy's Talks. My name is Alice Dyson, and I'm the director of the Lucie Foundation. We are delighted to have this conversation today with the two category winners of the 2024 Lucie Photo Book Prize program, Dr. Gulbransen and J Carrier. Brent Lewis, photo editor of the New York Times and co-founder of Diversify Photo, will go in depth with the two photographers about their process, inspiration, and their journey in creating their body of work and making their books. They will explore both photographers' work through a slideshow, as well as insight into the bookmaking process and including the importance of photo editing. We will have a Q&A at the end of the conversation, so please, any questions you might have, send them through to the Q&A section. We'll get to as many as we can. So without further ado, let's get started. If the panelists will please join me, and let's get on in. Have a great talk, everyone.
Woo! Alice, thank you so much for having us. This is absolutely amazing. Always geek to be here. Books are my guilty pleasure. If you ever see my bookshelf or my bank account, at the end of Lucy Awards, this is what always happens. But yeah, again, my name is Brent Lewis. I'm a photo editor at the New York Times, working on our breaking news homepage, all that jazz, as well as some of our enterprise stories, really cool stuff. That's my 9 to 5. My 5 to 9 is I am the co-founder and I guess president of Diversify Photo, a database. And oh my God, sorry, I'm blanking. Just got on vacation. My spill's a little off. I'm just coming back. A database of photographers of color from around the world, looking to really making sure that we're being able to tell the stories that really represent the world as a whole. Like, how are we doing this? How are we doing these storytellers and things like that if we're not reflective, if the people making the images aren't reflective of the communities that we serve? So enough about me. Let's get into our two winners. Let's talk to Greg and Jay. So Greg, introduce yourself really quickly and your amazing backstory that I'm still blown away at.
Okay, so I'm Greg Gulbransen. I'm a pediatrician. I'm presently sitting right here on Long Island and in my office. And I had a story where years ago, unfortunately, I backed over and accidentally killed my son with my SUV. And as a pediatrician, that was obviously beyond devastating. And it's very hard to get your head around that one. So I had a couple of options, and I chose to sort of lead the way and be an inspiration. And I worked with quite a few other people who were powerful and talented in Washington, D.C., and we were able to get a bill passed and turned into a law ultimately after many years, named after my son, that makes it mandatory that in this country, there's a camera in your car when you go in reverse. Okay. So that went into effect in 2018. And that was a very big thing. It's a coincidence that it's, a camera, because I really was not a photographer at the time at all. I was just a struggling pediatrician, and I was hell-bent on trying to turn channel my grief into policy change. And I was lucky enough to work with some other people to be able to get that done, people in Washington. That was a hard thing. I went through a few administrations. George Bush, we had the help of Hillary Clinton, and ultimately during the Obama administration, it went through. And during the pain and suffering of that time, I became a work fanatic. You just keep seeing more and more patients and working more and more weekends and really working 28 to 30 days a month in a busy office here. And I decided at one point I had to pick up a camera. And so that's when I contacted one of my brothers and I said, listen, you got to, I got to do something here. So he somewhere in California, he got me this long lens, 600 millimeters with a Nikon, where I didn't even know how to use I didn't even know what histogram was. And I put it right on top of the tripod with no gimbal. And I was going to go out and photograph snowy owls, which I had seen with my dad many years before. My dad was one of my heroes. And you never see snowy owls. But there they were on Long Island in the wintertime. And I think I'm going to go down and photograph snowy owls. Sure enough, there they were. Didn't know what I was doing, and sort of went through that painful process. Eventually, the photography caught a click with me, and I was spending most of the time alone on the beach with animals and birds and stuff like that. And then eventually, it transferred over to doing, well, let's go on trips and learn more about photography, learn how to use this friggin' camera. And I would go on these workshops and learn how to be a photographer. I would photograph bears and polar bears and grizzly bears, and that's what you do. You pay people as a doctor to go out and learn how to use a camera, and then you buy more camera gear, and you think you're going to take better pictures, and you don't. So I went through that phase. Okay, sort of came into the back door, the traditional way, And then eventually I got serious about it and realized that it was really about the human connection. It's really about people with me. That's me, my style, because I am a people person. I deal with 70 to 80 to 90 kids a day downstairs. And my father was a storyteller, so I decided I needed to spend some time with that. My wife said to me, "Why do you have to go so far to take pictures? Why do you have to go on these workshops to Alaska?" I was like, "You're right." So I went back to the Bronx where I had done some of my medical school training, and there was something about that community that I was drawn to. I come from a very different type of community, and I really saw it was very intriguing something about that. And I went back there and I fell in love with a group of kids riding bicycles. You've seen these bands of bicycles riding through New York City, right? Well, sometimes that was me in there with them. And I would do that. And I sort of fell in love with them because they were trying to stay out of gangs. And the motto was bikes up, guns down when Dr. Greg's around. So I'd make these sweatshirts and we'd ride all over the place. And I'd get lost downtown in Manhattan. We started in the Bronx and I'd be like, hey man, can someone get me back home? So I wrote with these guys and I'd photograph them. And I was impressed that they were trying to stay out of trouble. And I did notice at one point a lot of people in the Bronx area were in wheelchairs and Spanish Harlem in wheelchairs. And I said to them, why is everyone in a wheelchair? And they said, those are spinal cord injuries. I said, yeah, I figured that, you know. I figured they have fallen out of buildings or getting hit by cars. He said, no, those people have been shot. And then as a pediatrician, the gun violence became more of an issue in this country, and it became a hotter issue in the NRA. And all of a sudden, the politicians were, here we go, based on who was in the administration at the time. And one of the riders was shot, and his name is Malik. And they said, Greg, you know what? You were interested in this gun thing, and you've been. I started to take pictures of just random people in the community who were shot, and it wasn't really getting anywhere. But I was intrigued by them and their stories. And then this boy was shot. He was 18, and um, I connected with him, and his name is Malik. And that started a many-year relationship and trying to understand what it's like, because my concern is my photography has turned into telling stories with the camera that are related to the health of youth in America. And right now I'm working on something with drugs, and then I do something with poverty in West Virginia, which I was working on today on the phone, and then I do this gun thing. And Malik adopted me. I adopted him. His mom adopted me, and I really became part of the family. And I have to tell you the truth, as I said before, I went to the house many times without the camera. I think I probably went more times, a probably equal number of times. And Christmas Day, New Year's Day, you know, going in there and checking things out and just sort of falling in love. And he's he's very sick, right? He has this paralysis from here down. He has to get catheterized every 8 hours, otherwise you get this dysautonomic syndrome where you have hypertensive crisis, you end up in the hospital. You get infections and you get cubitus ulcers. It's pretty serious. Diapers being changed at all times. Marijuana's flying all over the place. You know, it's just
Mhm.
so. Greg, it's 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. I've just finished seeing patients. I'm exhausted. Malik has no more catheters. He's going to have to go there. I said, I run out to Long Island. I get catheters at a surgical supply store. I drive in, get them the catheters. So I became involved in their life that way. It really was a genuine caring thing. Because to be quite honest with you, I was always concerned about, wait a second. What are they going to think about a white doctor coming in here and photographing in a black community? And I struggled with that issue for a long time. And there's an issue that was very sensitive to me. And I realized, in this group of bicycle riders were some white children, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and black riders. And it just so happens that he was black. And then, so, in his apartment, many black people live there. And in his family, 5 men, all black, were shot and survived. 5 in this one family. In that apartment one day, I saw all 5 men in the same room, how all had been shot and survived. So I realized, I was talking to the mom, and I said, "How do you feel about this? Because I'm having more trouble than they are. In fact, they didn't have any trouble with it." And they said, "Listen, someone's got to tell the story. We want the story told. You got to tell the story. So please, do this, do this, do this." I had no intentions of making a book. I just wanted to somehow tell a story. I didn't know anything about photo books, and I just did it that way. I followed their flow, and I documented it, and I went there, and it was, I guess I was going through. I look back at the book and it scares me because I was going there. I was going there. That's an hour from my house.
Mm.
I was going there after dinner, before dinner, after work, and Sunday morning before work. I work all the time, but I was really struggling, and eventually I contacted Sasha Wolf, who is a gallery owner in New York, and she's
Hmm.
fine art. Sasha works with Brian Schupmat and all those guys, and I showed her the pictures, and I said, I need someone to print some of these pictures, and so she gave me Bob Tursak from Brilliant Graphics. Bob does the work for Sally Mann and Mark's, what's his name again? Mark's, not in Italy, but it's Mark's with the letter S. I forget his name. Anyway,
Yeah.
and all these famous photographers. And he said, wait a second, you got to show this to Ralph Gibson. He's the grandfather of photo books. And I said, all right. So I paid for this session with Ralph Gibson. And he said, wait.
Great, great. Hold it, hold it. I want to go through this with the slides. We got to
Okay.
get people got to
Okay.
know the work. We're gonna hold
Okay.
on to the full
Okay.
story. I gotta
Okay.
keep them here. Um, let's see. Jay, not really quickly. Take your time. Have a quick little introduction. Introduce yourself and the work to it. To everyone come hang out. So Jay, what's happening? What's going on?
Yeah, hey, all right, welcome, thank you. Great story though, Greg. And yeah, getting up to Ralph Gibson, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, so my name is J Carrier, photographer, artist, also a professor of photography at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Um, I guess, yeah, like Greg, my coming to photography is also quite circuitous. I actually studied biology and forestry, but also um, played the drums during my undergrad degree. And then kind of after I graduated, forgot everything to do with my degree. I started playing in a band. But while I was in a band, because you don't make any money, I started photo assisting. And that's where I kind of learned, in spite of not having any, education in photography, I learned camera formats, the business back end of it, dealing with clients, etc. But if anybody's photo assisted, you know that you can't do it for very long, or else you get stuck. And doing photo assisting in DC was not, the most exciting assignment work that one could be dealing with. So I actually thought I should get back to my degree. I joined the Peace Corps, quit playing music, and as I was lucky though, and one of the photographers that I work with sent me off to the Peace Corps with her old FM2, and so and that's where it all kind of clicked for me. And so that was in 2000, and um, I was living in Ecuador in South America, and started freelancing eventually for Agence France Presse, and and making it, I guess, try not to tease everything out, but I eventually, I wanted to, I wanted to, my exemplars were kind of Magnum. I was looking at, and a lot of the conflict photographers, and this was as I mentioned in 2000, and then 2001 we were in Iraq, and I was thinking, that's where I was gonna try to go and try to become a, photojournalist, a war photographer. I ended up taking a different route. I moved to Africa in 2004, but I was working in, I guess, more post-conflict situations. But really, my experience in the Peace Corps, I think, in kind of, and then the climate after 9/11, I was really interested, as Greg mentioned, sort of connecting with stories, and then. So I spent a good, I guess, 5 years freelancing across the continent. Newsweek, New York Times Magazine, Le Monde, Men's Journal, etc. A lot of magazines that actually went out of business, now that are no longer around. But yeah, so that's sort of my background. But then in about 2009, I relocated from Africa to Jerusalem, and I mentioned those Magnum photographers and wanting to be a photojournalist. And when you think about Jerusalem, when you think about Israel, you know, you invariably, you have a kind of image in your head of, you know, that conflict that's been photographed extensively. And we could all probably picture that, you know, that picture is, you know, the rock throwers and the kafias and the, you know, Israeli tanks. And so when I, having kind of worked in those conflict situations, I was like, I want to try to do something different in this place. And so that's, I kind of changed my process dramatically, you know, moved from digital cameras to working with a large format 4x5 camera, a field camera. And that's where we'll maybe talk a bit more, but that's kind of my trajectory and a bit of my background.
Okay, nice. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, no, it's really eye-opening, especially looking at your work. It just reminds me, like you can see when I remember I first opened through your work, came to the book, and I was like, this is not the take on this situation in the Middle East that I was expecting. And it threw me for a little bit of a shock. And it like, because granted, I'm at the Times, I see, like you said, the rock throwing, the photojournalism way about it. But it had a different feel and approach to it. So I'm really looking forward to talking about this more in a few. But right now, Greg, this is your show. This is your time. If you're ready to go, we can talk through some of the work, talk through the slideshow.
Sure.
Let's do it. So yeah. Say Less, you're amazing, absolutely phenomenal book. Again, congrats. So I want you can guide us through this as well, but I really want to ask a quick question about this of like, why did you start off here and what's going on in this photo?
So this is one of the main characters, a good friend of mine, who really did the introduction between myself and Malik, and his expression was always "say less," and I had to learn what that actually meant. So it's basically it's going on, but let's not talk about it. And this was selected as the cover by the um, publisher himself, Stu Smith,
Mhm.
who owns GOST Publishing. That was a last minute under the gun sort of a Frank Lloyd Wright decision. 11th hour, 59 seconds to go, bam, that's it. And I
Mhm.
like that picture. It really sums it all up.
Yeah, so much of what's going on. And honestly, the environment. We'll talk about it when we get to some more photos. But I remember seeing a few of these up front, and I was like, I got kind of concerned because again, as a person from Chicago, South Side Chicago to be specific, we see a lot of gun violence. So those photos
Yep.
immediately jumped out like, oh. But we get into much more photos like this. So let's go into this. Where are we at? What's happening?
So this is Malik. Well, he gets hospitalized often. Like I said, he has a lot of complications. He gets urinary tract infections with fevers, which is called the pyelonephritis. He also gets infections in his skin. He also needs a fair amount of plastic surgery to this ulcers. And when he goes in, I'll visit him. And this is one of his, was probably the first time that I saw him in the hospital. I snuck the camera into NYU. I don't think they were appreciative about it, so I just got it done. And yeah, that's Malik right there doing his thing right in the beginning of our relationship, I'd say. This is a typical scene before everybody was arrested and went down because when I got on the scene, the timing was right. There was a lot of tension. The gang, this particular gang, was being sort of brought down for things that had been done before I got there. I don't know what they were. I can see the charges on paper. If you look it up online, they're all there. But this would be your typical scenario, at least that many people in the room, and he would sort of hold court. And it's quiet in there now because once everybody got, went to jail and he didn't,
Mhm.
there's not too many people around. In fact, half of the people, two of the two characters on the left and right here in the front, they're both in jail for a variety of crimes related to guns. And
Ah,
yeah, the two women in the back, I'm not sure. So one of the things that would happen that I was impressed with is that they would come in and take care of him, and they would strip him down and put him in the shower. And he would sit there and take a shower, and then they get him back dressed and put him back in the bed. And they really did take care of him very well. At times, his mom did a lot of caretaking for him. Here she is. That's
mhm.
you can see the open source, and that's a woman in the background who lives upstairs, who was very close with me, and she did Malik's hair. A young,
Mhm.
very intense mom and very dedicated, and really the relationship between the two of them. Here's this rough, tough guy who's in the gang, and you can imagine, right? And yet calls her mom,
Yeah,
mommy, mom. It's
exactly.
quite a thing to see. But these sores are really super high maintenance because they become carcinogenic at any time. So you have to be very, very careful, or infected. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The one thing I
uh,
would, oh, go ahead, keep going.
that
Go ahead.
shot there really sums up their relationship. They love each other very much. And I was so, there was this tragic, dark environment, and it's just very rough and tough, and death, and the beautiful love that they have between the two of them is really so wonderful to see. It was just I was always touched by it, still am to this day.
Yeah, pause here for a second. I just wanted to talk about like this photo and actually like the last three.
Yeah,
Because like you said early on, like it's so much of you're talking a little bit about like the human connection, the human interaction that makes these stories come to life. And the tie-ins that so much of the work does. And these are the moments that we don't usually see of folks in this situation. Like folks that like people that came up in gangs or had to live a certain lifestyle. Like we don't see these intimate moments of kind of like that facade flowing away. And I think that's beautiful. And also going back to the photo of them, his members of his crew, like bathing him, helping him out, and things like that. That's mind-boggling. Like I've seen stories like this done by like Carlos Javier Ortiz, who's a friend of mine out of Chicago. And but when the acts of harm happen, gunshots, sterilization, like you see a scatter, you don't see that ideal of that community. So I think like photos like this just have made this work shine and feel different than so much other work that I've seen. I just wanted to shout that out while we're here, but we can keep going, keep moving through.
so there she is in the background. If you go back, and she's making the crip symbol with her finger, and then
Hmm.
on the right side there's a stuffed animal, teddy bear, right?
Exactly. It's so good. And just
Yeah,
like also like the way that you work this room,
yeah,
just brings so much into it. And like really, I don't want to spoil it for folks who haven't fully got through it, but just how much life goes on in this room and how people exist in
yeah,
this space.
yeah. That room is the hot spot. Yeah.
Hmm. All right, let's keep going.
So this, there are multiple different projects in the South Bronx, and Mott Haven particularly. The Mitchells projects are really the big projects where I shoot most of the stuff. I still do to this day. And Malik was shot right in front of this building on the street. And there are other projects in the area, and there's generally tension between the different gangs and the different projects. But this would be your typical scene, think nothing of it, walking into the entrance to this building. I mean, that's just the way it is at all times. So when I saw this, the playground, the slide will have a dent, a dent from a bullet and all this kind of stuff. But I just think this kind of sums it all up on a cold winter day with snow. It's just rough.
Hmm. Yeah, like once again, like the earlier side of the book really helped to set that scene.
Hmm.
At times it felt, and we're getting to the editing of it, like it felt like it could have gone towards that direction of like, oh, I've seen this before, this kind of stereotypical, but like it really, really sets the scene for the viewers and the readers who haven't been there before. And so scenes like this that are normal to me, for folks who haven't seen them, it really leaps off the page and puts you in that mindset. I think it's a glorious addition in the editing process. But let's keep going. We can go to the next photo.
So in the beginning, Malik wanted to get family first tattoo across his chest. And I could never figure out exactly what was going on. You try to get close to to people who come from different backgrounds, and I never asked Malik personal deep questions about, what happened, that kind of thing. And I was just kind of observing. So here is a scene where he was waiting to get this tattoo put on his chest. And I turned around. Behind us is the studio there, and I took the picture. And you just knew that he was battling some kind of turmoil, some tension, and there was things that he was worried about. And it wasn't until later on when everyone started going to jail except for him that I realized that there was bad things that he must have been regretting in life. I still don't know exactly what took place, but I was lucky enough that he was able to let me in there. And it turns out right behind me on the other side of him, who there was another gentleman who had a black hoodie on and a hat. He's in some of the other pictures in the book. And he was with Malik this day and helped Malik. And he had just murdered somebody a week
Mm.
before in Virginia and got a double life sentence. And that's why he's in
Oh.
the pictures in the book. And that's why his face is not in any of the pictures. I was like, why is he
Mm.
showing his face? But I was respectful. If someone didn't want their picture taken, I didn't take it. But if they wanted to hide their face, yeah, that's fine. I was always never crossing the line. But and I guess, Malik probably knew that he just took somebody out. So yeah, there I was in the midst of the whole thing, just photographing it and knowing that there was a lot of emotion and capturing the emotion, but I didn't really understand what the emotion was at the time. I just knew that I had
Mm.
to capture it.
Oh, I love that. And one thing I really, really also love about your back and forth with them is that like you didn't push. You're like, I'm here,
No.
you can tell me what you want to tell me. I'm involved, but also we talked about this in one of your previous interviews, the ideas of like not passing judgment.
Yeah.
Just kind of being like, I'm here. Like we've all done things, we're all human.
Yep.
And just because people might be this way, there's many sides to this coin. And so, but keep going, we can talk about this one.
So death is a very large part of their life, unfortunately. And morbidity and mortality in this neighborhood is really quite high. And I come from a background where there was a lot of morbidity and mortality, and I killed my son, and he died in my arms, and so I'm sensitive to this kind of stuff. But around the corner from where Malik lives is this little old church. And it goes back to what you remember in the 80s when the South Bronx was this burnt out area. And there was this pastor. She was a mom of many kids. She comes from Tennessee and Memphis, and I write about her. And she was married to the drummer of the Apollo Theater, and she had all these kids, and she was an assistant in the schools in Harlem, and decided that she was going to take one of these burnt out buildings and turn it into a gospel church. And she did over the years. And I befriended her and would go to her church. I still talk to her, and she calls me when she needs things for the great grandchildren. She's 87 now. And I would go to the church sometimes, and Malik would come to the church with me sometimes. And she became, I ended up doing a little photo essay about her church. And Leica actually has those pictures on their website somewhere. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing. And she's the one who taught me this very, very important lesson. I said, I call her mama and she calls me son. I said, Mom, I don't feel comfortable. I don't think I'm doing the right thing as a white, middle class suburban photographer doctor coming in here and photographing. And I said it to her 3 times. And the third time I said it to her, she said to me, Doc, listen to me. God sent you here. We need our story told. You're the only one who wants to tell it. If you need blood, you can have my blood, and vice versa. Blood doesn't know color. Don't leave, keep shooting. And it was that third time where I finally said, as long as I'm doing it right and I'm telling the story accurately, honestly, and I'm working with the subjects I'm photographing and they're approving of things, I'm just going to keep going. And
Mhm.
that's how I ended up doing it. But this scene particularly, Malik said to me, Greg, you got to get the pastor. Something's not right. And at this time, this is when a lot of the other members were being taken away in jail, and the cops are coming in and closing the street down and knocking them all out. And I don't know exactly why he didn't go. I can only imagine the judge must have said too much maintenance to go to jail. But he said to me, can you get the pastor? She,
Mm.
the week before, anointed herself as an apostle. So I went to get the apostle, and she came over and she prayed with him. And I actually took the shot on the other side about 5 times, 5 or 6 times, face on. And I remember Matt Black saying in one of his lectures, sometimes the photograph's from the other side. So I went behind and I took that shot. And that's really when she's blessing him. This picture represents,
Mhm.
is a metaphor for Malik is trapped, right? Now that he's
Mhm.
a victim
Yep.
of gun violence, the community is trapped in gun violence, as are other inner city communities. The country is trapped in this world of gun violence. So this is about being trapped.
Mm. Yeah, just getting, you can see the damage that the walls are
Yep.
taking, just trying to get the wheelchair through. Yeah, this is one image, and like the way you played it in the book is like perfectly because you flip over to it, you see that, and I think that's a photo of his son across
Yep.
the page to the book, and like
Yep.
it hits home. It's
Yep.
completely stark. You read that immediately, like flawless.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, Greg, I'm gonna say any more passing thoughts before we get to Jay. We'll come back around to talk about editing. But any other thoughts you want to close out with?
I'm excited to learn about Jay's work. I think this is fascinating.
All right, cool. Let's do it. Jay,
Awesome.
let's talk about your amazing book. Like, bring me into it. We know how you got here, but what made this jump out to you in a way? And for the fans, for the non-fans of Jay, which you should all be fans, um, knowing your first book, this definitely
Mm.
feels a little different. So let me know what we got here.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, it is quite different. I mean, so if any of you are familiar with the first book, it was I say it's different. It's different in one sense. I guess maybe in a formal sense, it was color work. Whereas Mirage, this work is black and white, but it's similar in a lot of ways. I guess to begin with, I consider them part of a trilogy. So Elementary Calculus was the first book, and then Mirage is kind of building on Elementary Calculus. And then I have a third book that I'm working on now, in the kind of post-production stages, I guess you'd say. Yeah. So it didn't start out that way. I mean, I didn't envision a trilogy, but I started Elementary Calculus in 2009, and then after a couple of years, I'd wrap that up for I guess like a little like and then I started it Elementary Calculus 2009. I brought it into my graduate program. I started at the Hartford Art School in 2010, which was focused on the photo book, and that was really why I went there. And I was really interested in that form, and working in across sequences of images. But I was about halfway through graduate school, and I'd finished Elementary Calculus, and I had to do something else basically. So in terms of that formal shift, I was really kind of thinking like I wanted to challenge myself, and so I was like, okay, well, I was working in color, so I'll work now in black and white. But it quickly made a lot of sense in terms of like where I landed on what I was photographing. And so for me, the black and white it was a way to kind of to bring in the element of light into the story, into the pictures, and so light for me in this book operates almost, it's a layer of content. And so and also to speak formally, I moved from in Elementary Calculus, I was doing some 6x6, some square format, but I was also doing some portraits and landscapes. Whereas with Mirage, I moved and decided to do only the 6x6. And initially I was thinking about kind of the formal motifs in Arabic, in like calligraphy and in a representation in Arabic non-figurative art in Islam and stuff. So I was thinking this kind of like the structure of the square, this evenness of it, and so those kind of ideas informed in the very early stages, and they fell away. But eventually, that decision also really led me to kind of think about images as kind of blocks, if you will, and also the images. For me, square images have more of this kind of object quality. I don't know what it is. It's maybe my own bias. I don't know if someone else might agree with that.
Agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, there's something about the solidity of them, right? The evenness, and so and so as a bookmaker, as someone who's like working in sequences of images, there was something interesting for me there. In addition to the fact that like the things that I was photographing, quite literally, there are photographs of blocks in the book, and it has a lot to do with kind of with the built environment, with building, and with the deconstruction and construction. And so that was a lot of those formal things, but that those formal decisions, I guess I should say, where it started really though was like it conceptually was out of I have a process of like I make work out of walking basically. And so as I mentioned earlier, I moved to Jerusalem in 2009, and I lived about 2 or 3 miles from the old city. And so it was this kind of magnet on the horizon. I mean, it's this steep walls, the old city. The first image that I think perhaps was in this slideshow is the Dome of the Rock. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, but the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are, in the same compound, and I could see them And so it was like this kind of this destination invariably that I would head towards. And not always getting there, like sometimes getting distracted and, but eventually that became the point of real focus for me. And I started
Hmm.
to research the history of the mosque and the Harami Sharif, the noble sanctuary. And that's when some things kind of clicked for me. I mentioned the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Al-Aqsa it translates to the faraway place.
Hmm.
And so for me that was like this really kind of evocative statement, this idea of a place that perhaps that we aspire to, right? There's something embedded in the faraway place for me that it speaks to, like desire, uh,
Hmm.
and yet it also has embedded in it some, in that the distance is something that precludes, or there's some difficulty in getting there.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so, I started playing around with that, and in elementary calculus, I also was really like, I was thinking about, um, that one is also this kind of circuitous thing I do with
Yeah.
wordplay. And so the calculus for me was, I used the word calculus thinking of like a decision.
Hmm.
And in that book, I was photographing a lot of refugees and asylum seekers in Jerusalem and
Exactly.
Tel Aviv. Yeah, and so these people that face this real stark calculus, this decision, like leaving where they grew up, their families, etc., to try to find a better life, or leaving because they were forced to out of fear for their lives and whatnot. So there was something in elementary calculus that was dealing with this same thing, like this like trying to get someplace.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, and then so in reading about Al-Aqsa, then I came across the story, the ascension story of the Prophet Muhammad.
Hmm.
And that's where
Yes.
Al-Aqsa is said to, Muhammad is said to have, flown from Mecca
Hmm.
to Al-Aqsa, to the faraway
Yep.
place, and then from there to heaven. Um,
Exactly.
and it was this really beautiful story to me, like it provided this inspiration and also a kind of framework structurally in the book, but more so in the beginning. um, is this kind of question, like for me, one, thinking about the faraway place, like what does that mean to us, and also the question of, like, were the Prophet Muhammad to return, like
Mm.
what would he find in this landscape today, right?
Exactly.
And then thinking, of course, he's a prophet, like he would not be encumbered by these things, but we are. And so
Hmm.
ultimately the question is, like, what does it mean for us? What possibility exists for us in this landscape of transcendence, uh,
Oh,
of like for something better, basically, right?
yeah.
And then that's like in that's a very like real question, for obviously for Israelis and Palestinians.
Yep. Exactly.
But I also think, like, broadly, like what this place signifies to people around the world, it's really like it does have like resonance outside of the specific context. So yeah, I mean that's the that's kind of like,
Yeah.
that's the origin, if you will, in my
Yeah.
the things that tumbling around in my head.
I love it because like now like hearing you speak about this is why I was really really excited to like actually have this back and forth with you, was to like really see where your head was at and like what you're aiming for, because now the images are already leaping off the page, but now I have so much more of an understanding,
Yeah,
and now I'm like reflecting at that in that different way, say reform, because I feel like when on paper you hear about the story, especially in the context of 2025, 2024, you're heavily loaded with the ideas of what happened between Israel and Palestine in the last, where we at, year two,
yeah,
at that. And so, but seeing this, also knowing the work previously, like it just takes a different weight. And that I really, really appreciate, and comes through
yeah.
Now, the one thing I really got excited about your story is that idea, and that Greg was a little different, is that you go about making books. Like books are your like end goal.
Yeah,
So how do you look at the work differently, gearing it towards a book rather than, I don't guess, throwing it on Instagram or social media
yeah,
or making prints or gallery hanging, although these 6x6 would make perfectly on Instagram. Just throwing it out
yeah.
there.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, OG Instagram. And as a photo editor, I mean, I could speak to you like, and like I've mentioned a little bit my background. I used to work like on a picture package, and you'd have to have like eight pictures, or if you're lucky,
Hmm.
like 12. But maybe you're probably just gonna get one. And
Hmm.
and
Exactly.
so like for the longest time I worked, and it's almost like there's like a level of like athleticism involved in that. Like
Yes.
y- I use that word like there's like you got to be like Jordan or like
Hmm.
like Kobe Bryant or something. You got to be
Yeah.
like yeah, like on point.
Hmm.
In that like eventually like I don't know like maybe I realized something about myself like I wasn't like the image maker. I wasn't that type of image maker, like that had that like single frame that was gonna with
Hmm.
POII.
Hmm.
uh but and so when I finally started to so when I finally started to work in the book form, it really just kind of liberated me that images became more malleable. And then that was also just, I think, a more sophisticated understanding of how photographs work in general. Um, like but also like embracing that kind of
Hmm.
malleability in that um and so that's the book really became interesting to me, and now like I could only like probably to a default I work in like really large extended sets of images.
Yeah.
um like the third book I'm working on now, it's like it's as it is now, I don't know how it will turn out, but it's like several hundred images.
Oof.
And so I almost like kind of can't conceive of like a single frame or something like that.
Hmm.
And then for me, the book, like I mentioned earlier, my process is like walking, and so the book for me, it can carry that experience. Like it can be meditative, which I find walking
Hmm.
and photographing to be. You can regress and you can progress, and you can digress and put it down, and like
Hmm.
so yeah, that's for me, like that's how the book kind of has taken on this real like power, and like it's kind of it's just such a rich form.
Mm, I love it. I love it. Especially like in this world right now where everything is like digital, everything's digital. Like the
Yeah,
book brings a different feel. The book brings a moment, like I said, you can meditate, you can look at it. Like I have both of y'all's books right
yeah,
here, and I've had like the greatest weekend of my life just like staring at photos,
yeah,
taking them in. It's no bing bongs. I don't have like an Instagram message or a New York
yeah,
Times alert popping up my phone. I'm in it. And I think that's beautiful. And it's such a lost, not a lost art, but it's art that I feel like people are slowly making their way back to it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, speaking of that, this question both of y'all. So how was the editing process? Because I know, like I don't think I've made anybody cry. I don't know how many people on the call, but if there's any photographers I worked with in the past, I apologize that your favorite photo didn't get in. My bad. But like, how was the photo editing process? That has to be tedious. Greg, go ahead, take it first. You want to go for it?
So I just had these images, and like I said, I wasn't intent. I never thought I was going to make a photo book, but I was lucky enough to get directed from Bob Tursek. He said, "You show these to Ralph Gibson." And Ralph Gibson, okay, show them to Ralph. He says, "Well, oh, wait a second, I have to teach you how to edit. I'm going to give you this program." Now I don't know art, but I'm a physician. And I'm smart enough to know that I will never have the skills of a professional photo editor. I said, "Ralph, I love you. You're somebody who I'm surprised you're even talking to me. I can't do this." He said, "All right, get Bill Shapiro on the phone." Now, Bill Shapiro is the editor of Life magazine. He's
Hmm.
your pictures, fell in love with them, said, "Can we do this together?" I said, "I'd love you to do this together because I don't have time." He contacted Richard Baker, the designer of Life and
Hmm.
Us Magazine Premiere. Richard put together this thing. We worked together as a trio. Basically, what we did
Oh.
was we put together a PDF, and then Bill Shapiro ended up um, soliciting different publishers, and it was pretty quick. GOST picked it up. Stuart Smith said, "I'll take it, but I want every picture he ever took." So he threw out our whole
Mm.
the whole project, and he started from the scratch. And he did that. I didn't fight very much about pictures. I know photographers. I know the way they fight. I know that
Hmm.
I have to have this picture in there. I think there was one picture that I was like, I really want this picture in. Other than that, I signed off, and I just let him do his thing. I mean, he's knows stuff I'll never know, so he's good. He's good at what he does.
Oh yeah, amazing. Jay, your response really quick, and then we get some
Yeah,
Q&As from the folks.
yeah. I mean, I, as I mentioned, coming out of like photojournalism, and you become a really fast editor. You got a file on deadline, you got a folder of images, and so I learned that over a number of years, and I also learned like, kind of like, I mentioned those picture packages earlier, so I kind of have like an idea of like structuring sets of images. I mean, I think. For me for the books it's obviously very different working on a much larger scale, but there's a bit of that in my DNA. I think ultimately I kind of like I will invariably land on it like some sort of internal structure. So in elementary calculus there was this like kind of elliptical arc that the book progresses through. In Mirage, I referenced the structure of the ascension story. So Muhammad travels through seven heavens, and so
Hmm.
I landed on this idea of chapters, and so then and then in each of those chapters starts in a certain way. So there's like devices, structures that I'll use to help with the editing, but it also becomes, part of it is intuitive, as any photographer will tell you, but there was also, something about like, trying to be coherent and like, what am I trying to say? So having like a clear sense of that. Um, and, and that's how I kind of, right, if I would quickly say
Yeah.
how I do it.
Okay. No, perfect. That's amazing. All right. So a couple of questions. One that everyone wants to know, that I want to know. So we heard a little bit about Greg's story. Jay, how did you get your book deal? How did you all get? How did that fall into your lap? Was it just knocking on publishers' doors? Like, hey, I got a book. Like, you're taking a PDF. It's like throwing it, leaving it on. Like, I don't know. They're having dinner. You just slip underneath their menu. Like, how does that work?
Well, that's that's a pretty crazy story. I won't go into all the details. But I mentioned, so I published my first book before I finished graduate school. I was published by Mac, um, and which was amazing. I was incredibly lucky to have that experience. And I was supposed to publish this book also with Mac, for a number of reasons. It didn't happen for a bunch of years, which and then ultimately, I think that I think Mac was reluctant to I can only speculate. But was reluctant to publish it perhaps for certain reasons. Um, it it uh, ultimately though came out with TIS books. Um,
Mhm.
Having had the good fortune of publishing with Mac, that was also at the same time. It was like that was my first book. I was um, um, I wasn't really like super involved in a lot of the material decisions, and
Hmm.
Mac it's like it's a big you know publisher. It's um, eh, so having the chance to work with TIS was really welcome because it was such a much more like organic and what working with Carl and Nelson at TIS, who were super supportive and really believed in the work. Um, we all went to graduate school together, so that's the kind of connection.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've kept in touch with them over the years. We're all super close. support each other, and they were just really like, believed in the work. Whereas,
Mm.
I think there was, like I said, there might have been some question about that for the previous publisher, but like yeah, so that, that was it, it got delayed because of COVID and all this stuff, but I was really happy with the way it turned out. I was lucky to work with a really great calligrapher who's at George Mason University,
Mhm.
um, who's actually a Syrian refugee. Yeah, so yeah, Abi Naanse, it was really a pleasure to work with him, and he does this really amazing stuff. And so it really came together like in a way that it never would have looked this good had I done it with any other publisher. So
Nice, nice. Well, we're still let's talk about books because I think that's one of the big things here, for both of y'all. So I know I've heard some people are like having to when bringing a book to a publisher, sometimes you gotta come out of pocket with funds to fund it. So like, how did that work? Greg, Jay took it the last time. So Greg, how did that work for you? Did like they're like, oh, bring us
Yeah.
a stack of money in a bag and leave it outside?
Yeah, they want okay. Yeah, it
Hmm.
was 3 payments
Okay.
cash. It was yeah. So in this office, I'm fortunate enough that there were people who were interested, and I had a benefactor contribute a bunch, and then I pay the rest
Mm.
myself. Yeah. Yeah, that's the reality of how it is. It's not cheap making a photo book. I didn't realize that textbooks behind me, you see them on the wall, the written books, you get paid for those things. Photo books,
Hmm.
at least at my complete level, it's
Hmm.
costly.
Yeah, exactly. Jay, same
yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, one of the I don't know if it's changed, but one of the some publishers will pay. So um, my first book, it was Elementary Calculus was paid for by the publisher,
Mm.
and then there's a royalty arrangement, and you get checks out of that. Um, uh, TIS, similar to Greg's experience, basically there's like a cost sharing agreement in terms of materials and printing and stuff like that. But yeah, the artist it might brings portion of the funds, and then those are recouped through sales. It's like the big like bottleneck on for artists on who like me are like trying to that like live and breathe through books. It's like um I have like 3 or 4 projects that I could like if I could push send on them and not pay any money, they would be out in the world. But it's a real serious like constraint is funding.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um and I think a lot of models have shifted. I can't speak to it, uh, much more than my experience, but I think a lot of it is similar to what Greg and mine's experience has been. Um, you know, Aside from like, unless you're, I don't know, um, Sally Man or something.
Exactly. One of the questions that just came up that I really want to know is, for myself as well. I'm going to think this is I'm gonna blame it on them, but for me as well. How do you all like curate and keep track of the hundreds and thousands of images? Like Greg, I know you worked on it for 3 years. Outside of other projects you're working on, Jay, you've worked over for a decade on this piece. So how are you all keeping those curated and together in a place where you can find them not spread across 69,000 hard drives?
In my case, I have Capture One. I don't shoot as many things as you think. I have a little library. Every year at the end of the year, take that library, put it on an extra hard drive. That goes in a vault somewhere also off the property. And also I use Backblaze. And I don't have as many pictures as Jay does, for sure. So I can keep things pretty well organized. But it's work. It's more work than I thought.
I'm gonna say I would imagine. Jay, same thing for you, because I mean, that's decades.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty brutal. I mean, it is like about I'm looking at like to my right, there is a bunch of hard drives. It's yeah, I mean I use Lightroom to try to keep shit straight, but it's also complicated by like until like 5 years ago, I was still shooting primarily film, so there's like you're kind of managing scans and negs and stuff. I did shift to digital exclusively, like, because it's just I have two kids, and to deal with film, one, it's like crazy expensive, and two, it's just like the work, the turnaround time for, from start to finish, if you got to scan and retouch. But like the third book I'm talking about with hundreds of images, I have to retouch all of those, which is, yeah, is messy. So yeah, hard drives, Lightroom, whatever, Blackblaze, I think it's called. I forget.
Hmm.
I turned it on a while ago, and it just uploads.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. I imagine,
yeah,
like, between the editing process of getting all those down and having to go through everything,
yeah.
it is definitely tedious. Now, one of the questions that I brought up a little bit, and I want to like dive into really, really quick as we get close to the end, is like, how do you all see photo books in this Instagram website, digital media space that we live in now? Because like right now, if someone brings me a book, I'm just like, oh my God, you're like, what are you from 1950? Thank you. Come join me. Let's hang out, look up your book. Well, because everyone now is like, here's an iPad. Let's go to my work, check my website. But just seeing the book, like, how do you think that works in a realm where honestly we're getting so much of our images for free, or in many cases, like I guess we're for the product, but we're getting so much of it in a way where we're not paying for it, we're just being fed it. So how do you all see books fitting in today, fitting in right now?
Say you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say maybe maybe they don't fit in today. I mean, I think and I'm being a little bit snarky. I guess what I was thinking of is like when I think about Robert Frank's The Americans and how many editions
Hmm.
that's been in, and the fact that like, I can send students to the stacks and they can pull that book off, or they can pull off another book. And that work just lives then in perpetuity. So, for thinking about like not necessarily today, um, but the future. And I know like, there, or Walker Evans' American Photographs, and you hear the stories of the photographers that came in the subsequent generations that were like, came across that work in a book and were like, minds were blown. This was before there was like any, obviously any electronic presence of images. Okay. But I still think books have that capacity, and I'm really invested in that. And I also think like, there's this whole, you started a few years ago, the kind of slow movement, right? There's like slow food, and I feel like, people, yeah, like, like light bouncing off of something versus emitting from something. And you were
Hmm.
referencing, like, a book can't like do a pop-up alert on you. And so, you know, if you can sit and like you have the tactility of it and that ability to go back and forth. And so, for me, like, I think there's a value in that experience. Obviously, it's like it's a very limited kind of audience versus social media, or a website, and so it's not either or. Um, so
I think the Instagram, where what billions of images every day come across these things, and that's what most of the masses like. But what Jay was saying, there's that niche community that really likes photography, and they'll always turn to the photo books. It seems like it's the new bar for photographers. I'm going to make this project into a photo book, and everything else.
Hmm.
I think we're probably getting a little bit, a little crazy. I don't think we should shoot with the intention of making it into a book. I think
Mm.
this time around, I'm doing two other projects and I'm slowing down, saying, "No, you didn't. You told yourself, don't. You didn't start off thinking a book. Just shoot it and love it,
Hmm.
and something will come." Like an attitude I learned in this office here by my accountant years ago is don't have a show me the money attitude. Just love the patients. And that was the
Mm.
greatest thing. But in this career as a physician, we worry about is artificial intelligence going to replace us? There's always going to be the need for the human interaction. It reminds me of the same thing with Instagram versus a photo book. There's always going
Hmm.
to be the love and the need for the texture of holding a book and looking at a book and seeing the beautiful pictures. And a well printed book by a skilled publisher, of which there are so many now, and Mac is one of the ones you're
Hmm.
talking about. There's no replacement for it. It's just so beautiful.
It's a whole different ballgame. Like I've seen work from so many friends that, like you said, also a lot of people have been publishing books in the pandemic in the actually past 5 years. So I've seen so much work coming out, but I've seen the work on Instagram while they were creating it, but being able to hold it, being able to physically flip through the pages and sit there. You can't beat them holding it down. Don't judge me. But like just basically being able to see the work, it brings a whole different life, a whole different experience. So with that, I think we're at time. So again, Greg, Jay, just want to thank you all so much for this.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you.
amazing. I've had an amazing time just going to talk back and forth with both of you all about the amazing work and just be enlightened. So I'm just so appreciative of that. And Alice and Lucy, thank you all so much for having me.
Thank
This has been
you.
great. So Alice, back to you.
Thank you guys so much. This is wonderful. And I see other questions are coming in, and I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of them, but hopefully next time. And just so everyone knows, this has been recorded, and the talk will be on our LucieTalks website page as well as our YouTube channel. So we'll try to get that up later today. So you guys will be able to watch that as many times as you'd like. So I know there's questions about that already coming in the Q&A. So thank you guys so much. Congratulations again on these well-deserved
you.
prizes,
You.
because your books are phenomenal. And I encourage everybody to pick up your copy, as they are labors of love, and it's people like us who love books to purchase them and support, which keeps this industry going. So that is very important. So you guys don't need those cafe lattes. Save those monies for a week, and then you can purchase a book and support the
Mhm.
publishers as well as the artists. So that's what we're about.
Indeed.
So,
Thank you so
yes,
much.
thank you guys so much. Have
Thank
a
you, Alice.
beautiful
Thank you, Brent.
evening, and we look forward to speaking with you guys hopefully soon down the line.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks,
good one.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye.